Hi, I'm Johnny from UltimatePaperMache.com, and for years people have been asking me if they could make the paper mache clay recipe that's out on my website or YouTube channel, but leave out the drywall joint compound. And the reason that they ask, there's two reasons usually. One is that in a whole lot of countries you can't buy drywall joint compound because they don't use it in their construction industry, so you can't get it at the local DIY store. Now there's other countries where you can get it, but it's really expensive. So a lot of people obviously are going to want to know if you can make either a paper mache clay or our Silky-Smooth Air Dry Clay recipe, same ingredients, but still have it work just as well, so that it goes onto an armature just as easily. It's less messy than paper strips and paste. It's easier to apply than the traditional paper pulp recipes that have been used for years. It doesn't crack. It's really smooth when it's finished, and it dries really, really hard, but no drywall joint compound, right? So today we're going to find out if we can do it without just leaving it out. I mean, you can obviously make the traditional paper pulp, just mush up some paper and add some glue or paste to it, and that's been used, like I said, for years. But I've never liked using it, and that's why I added the drywall joint compound to it in the first place, because I wanted something that was easier for me to use. So it seems to me that the best thing to replace the drywall joint compound with will be the main ingredient of drywall joint compound. In the pre-mixed joint compound, which is what we use in our recipes, the main ingredient is calcium carbonate. It's also found, exactly the same stuff, in art supply stores as powdered marble, which would be kind of fun. If it works, we could say we're creating a mixed media sculpture out of powdered marble. I mean, that'd sound cool, but it's calcium carbonate basically. I've got some here at the house. I don't happen to have any drywall joint compound in the house, so that's why today is the day that we're going to do the experiment. It's just to find out if this works. It's been in my mind for a really long time that it should work, but I've never tried it before. Now I'm also hoping that if we use the powdered marble or calcium carbonate instead of the pre-mixed joint compound, that the powdered marble will also replace the flour in the recipe, because there's a lot of countries where it's really, really humid, or they have mice or ants or all kinds of bugs because of the environment that are really attracted to the flour in the mix. So this would kind of take care of two different problems if it works. Now in this particular experiment, I decided that since the air dry clay recipe and the drywall joint compound use the same ingredients, I'm going to use the air dry clay recipe just because it makes a smaller batch than the original paper mache clay recipe. And since we don't know if it works or not, I don't want to make a really big batch and then have to throw it out. And since they're both basically the same ingredients, if we can get it to work for the air dry clay recipe, it should also work for paper mache clay. Now we saw in a video recently, I told you that you can make either one of those recipes without using the toilet paper. You can just use recycled paper instead. That's what I'm going to do today too, because toilet paper is scarce, you know. I've got all the ingredients here on my table. We're going to go ahead and find out. Let's start mixing stuff up and see what happens. What I have so far is newspaper that was soaked in hot water for about half an hour. Then I ran it through the immersion blender in order to break up all the fibers. I started out with the 24 grams that the original recipe calls for, and then I squeezed out as much water as I could. The recipe calls for 110 grams. I got to 120 and I just couldn't get any more water out of it. So it's not exactly the same as the original recipe, but it's really, really close. Now, the next part that is called for in the original recipe is the joint compound. We're not going to be using it. This is the half cup of PVA or Elmer's glue all. Any PVA glue should work. Let's go ahead and mix it here. But now for the fun part. We're going to start adding the calcium carbonate. This is what it looks like. It's just powder. I want to get at least slightly scientific about it, so I'm going to see how much of the calcium carbonate we have to start with. And put it on grams. 603 grams. I'm going to write that down so I don't forget. It's mixing in nice and evenly. Obviously not clay yet though. And it is absorbing the water. Now what I need to do is move this over to the dough hooks, because otherwise it's probably going to start crawling up into the housing of the mixer, and I really don't like it when it does that. Now one thing about the powdered marble is that you don't want to be breathing it when it's just powdery. That's true of any fine powder. So if you really think you're going to be spreading it around in the air for any reason, you might want to wear a mask. It'd be kind of the same as if you were sanding it after it dries. Okay, now it's crawling up the beaters even with the dough hooks, so I'm going to go put my gloves on, wash my hands first, and start kneading it by hand. It's still really wet, even though it was crawling up the beaters. So it's going to take a little bit more time. I'm going to put 2 in there this time. Still really wet and gushy. And I am using up quite a lot more of the powdered marble than I thought I would need to, because there wasn't all that much water, I didn't think, in the mix. But if I was going to do this very often, because this is kind of messy and a pain in the neck, and assuming that it works, of course, is I would use a paint mixer attached to a drill to mix this up in the last stages. I don't like this part at all. It's still really sticky, and you know what I'm going to do? Since we're in the experimental stages here, I'm going to try to get rid of the stickiness with some cornflour. Cornstarch, I'm sorry. Very different stuff. Okay, it's already a little bit less sticky. I have to admit, I just really didn't like that before. But see, now you can actually get some details in here. It's not done yet. Now we've got a kind of a fine line here we've got to kind of stop at. If you get it too unsticky, then it isn't going to stick to the armature. But if you don't take enough of the stickiness away, then you can't really use it, because this would be really hard to make any kind of shapes with, because your hands get all stuck to it. It's really close. Okay, look at that. Can you see that? It's holding a almost paper thin shape. But now we need to find out what happens when we put it on over an armature and let it dry. Gotta go make an armature of some kind, don't we? But before I forget, I want to measure out our powdered marble and see how much we actually use, more or less. This is not scientific. We had 603 grams to start with, 381 now. So 222 grams is what I put in there. I put it in this cupboard container, because I'm pretty sure it's going to dry out really fast. Well, it is still sticky. We could have used a little bit more cornstarch, but it's also sticking to our armature really good too. So it's kind of a trade-off. See what happens when I use a wet tool to smooth it on. Oh, that's nice. Oh, that's really nice. That's much smoother than we'd ever be able to get the original Paper Mache Clay recipe, but the original Silky-Smooth Air Dry Clay recipe will do this. I don't know how much we actually need for our test as far as drying. I want to see if it cracks. That's the big issue. It's easier to do it, to smooth it out and to spread it with the tool, because this does kind of pull up some of the little paper fibers, but it's also smoothing it off really nice. Now I guess I should, let's see what we're going to do. Just give it some kind of shapes here. I'm just doing this so that we can test different thicknesses. Let's go dry them out really fast. So I dried it really fast in the oven just to see if it would work, and it looks like it did. It is really hard. Really hard. It held some really nice details, as you see right here. I just have some little wrinkles in his eyebrow. It didn't lose any details. It didn't crack at all, even though I was drying it really quickly in the oven. The surface is quite hard. Really hard. I think maybe even harder than the Paper Mache Clay. Is that possible? Maybe. I think we got a winner. I do a lot of experiments, and some of them work and some of them don't, but this one really did. This stuff is really hard as a rock. This is cool. Now, if you try it yourself, this is an experiment that I did. I didn't get real exact measurements or anything, but what I do know, I did keep track of some of them. I started out with 24 grams of the dry paper. After it was wet and I got as much of the water out as I could, it was 120 grams. I used a half a cup of the PVA glue. That would be Elmer's glue here in the United States. Any white glue I think will work. And I used 222 grams more or less of the powdered marble or calcium carbonate. And I used about less than half of a cup of the cornstarch. That's going to be totally up to you, because it really did make, well, you saw me doing it. It was really messy and really gooey for a while. So go ahead and add as much as you want to. And also, as I said before, if you get it too dry, it's not going to stick to your armature. So it's kind of a trade-off as to how much of that cornstarch you're going to add. You'll want to definitely use some of your gloves. And again, you saw why. It was pretty gooey, but in the end it came out really nice. I'm really happy with it. Now, if you haven't actually seen the original recipes, go ahead and watch those. I'm going to put the links to them right here, or I'll put the links to them down below. So go ahead and do that now. Then go make something and come visit me at ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.